The fluorescent lights of Fairview Pines hummed a monotonous, sterile lullaby. For James Croft, a man who had spent a lifetime surrounded by the whispered secrets of old masters and the vibrant chaos of Soho openings, the sound was a form of torture. The beige walls, the sad, potted fern, the faint smell of antiseptic and boiled vegetables. This was not a retirement home. It was a gilded cage. His children, Amelia and Charles, had visited exactly once since depositing him there 3 months ago. Amelia had patted his hand with the same detached affection she might show a beloved but troublesome pet. "It's for the best, father. You need rest." The doctors were very clear. Charles, meanwhile, had been more interested in the locks on the door and the details of the estate's security system. They were circling, like vultures who had mistaken a master for carrion. James, however, was a master of a different sort. He was a master of perception, of nuance. He had seen the hunger in their eyes, the impatience. They weren't just waiting for him to die. They were already planning the auction, already counting the millions his priceless collection would bring. What they didn't know was that James had been planning his escape from the moment they'd handed him his "Welcome to Fairview" folder. But he needed an ally. He needed a way to communicate with the outside world, a way to get a message to someone he could trust. And then she walked in. Her name was Pamela Vance. She was young, with paint-stained jeans and eyes the color of aged whiskey, which surveyed his suite with a critical, unflinching honesty. She was there to appraise the condition of a small Matisse that Amelia had brought in, supposedly to brighten the place up. James knew better. It was a test, a way for Amelia to gauge his mental state, to see if he'd cling to his things. Pamela was brilliant, fiercely independent, and, as James quickly discovered, utterly immune to his charm. When he tried to compliment her technique, she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "It's a simple cleaning and varnish removal, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice crisp. "The real art is in not ruining the original." But James saw something else. He saw a woman who understood the value of the genuine article, someone who lived in a world of truth and pigment. He took a risk. He described the painting he'd always regretted selling, a small, haunting Courbet. He watched her face, saw the flicker of recognition, the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. He knew she'd heard of it, and he knew she was the key. He started his campaign. He'd slip her notes during his appointments, hidden in the folds of a handkerchief or slipped into a book. Notes about the safe in his London study, the combination of which Amelia didn't know, and the location of the hidden vault in his country house. Notes about a man named Gaspard, a brilliant forger in Montmartre. At first, she was horrified. "You want me to help you steal from your own family?" she hissed one afternoon, after reading a note about the forger. "I'm not a criminal, Mr. Croft." "You're an artist, Pamela," he countered, his voice low and urgent. "And you're the only one who can save my art. They're not going to appreciate it, Pamela. They're going to butcher it. They'll sell it to the highest bidder who'll lock it away in a private vault, never to be seen again. Is that what you want?" She hesitated. He saw it. The conflict in her eyes was a beautiful, desperate war. He pushed harder. "They think I'm a senile old man. They don't even see me. They don't see the woman who actually cares about the work. You and we're in the business of preservation, not destruction." It was the word preservation that did it. He saw her resolve harden. "This is insane," she muttered. "This is the most insane, reckless, and possibly brilliant plan I've ever heard." She was in. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Over the next few weeks, a series of routine restorations were arranged. The Matisse, a small Renoir, a prized drawing by Degas. Each painting would leave Fairview Pines for Pamela's studio and return a few weeks later, looking pristine. But what returned were flawless copies. Gaspard, the old forger, was a ghost, a master of brushstroke and crackle. He worked from high-resolution photographs and painstakingly recreated the aging process, the subtle yellowing of varnish, the tiny, almost invisible loss of pigment. The real masterpieces, however, were not in the frames. They were being cataloged by James, one by one, from his memory and from his secret notes, and stored in a safety deposit box under Pamela's name. It was during this clandestine operation that the great mix-up occurred. James had painstakingly written a note for Pamela, detailing the Monet haystacks he needed her to get from his study. He described the frame's unique damage, the exact shade of the faux gilt. He handed the note to a new, rather flustered nurse. "Please," he said with his most charming smile, "give this to Pamela, the restorer." The nurse, intimidated and in a hurry, delivered it to P. Vance. The problem was, there was another P. Vance on the staff that week. A young, eager beaver financial analyst named Peter Vance, who was there for a residency to audit the facility's accounts. Peter, thinking it was a legitimate appraisal request, went to the estate, found the painting, and took it to his apartment to verify it. He was utterly clueless about art. He simply opened the crate, stared at the vibrant masterpiece, and put it in a closet. When James next saw Pamela, his face was a mask of controlled panic. "Did you get it? The Monet?" Pamela frowned. "What Monet? You gave the nurse a note about the Degas. I just got it back to the studio." James paled. "A note about, the nurse must have, there's been a catastrophic error." He slumped back in his chair. "The Monet. It was the key." Gaspard was waiting for the reference image. "Without it, he can't make the copy. The family is planning a gala auction in 2 weeks. It's the centerpiece. If they try to sell the real one, the whole scheme falls apart." Despair was a new and unwelcome feeling for James. He saw their grand plan, their partnership, dissolving. Pamela put down her tools and placed a firm hand on his. Her eyes were blazing. "No," she said. "We're not giving up. You're James Croft. You didn't become the most feared art dealer in London by surrendering. We find the painting. We get it to Gaspard. We improvise." She was magnificent. Her steely determination was more beautiful than any old master's depiction of a goddess. Over the next 48 hours, using a network of favors and a bit of creative computer work, Pamela tracked the painting to Peter's apartment. He was terrified when she confronted him, but a few stern words and a threat to report him for unauthorized removal of private property had him handing over the crate. The clock was ticking. The auction was in 10 days. Gaspard, who was a true artist of the con, received the image and worked feverishly. The copy arrived at the estate, a final installation, just 2 hours before the family's private viewing. The gala auction was held at the magnificent Croft estate, a Georgian manor dripping with chandeliers and self-importance. Amelia, resplendent in silk, was the hostess, her smile as sharp as a scalpel. Charles, in a custom-made suit, played the part of the discerning art connoisseur. They had invited the creme de la creme of the art world, all prepared to bid on the legendary Croft collection. The bidding was fierce. The Renoir went for a staggering sum. The Degas was swallowed up by a phone bidder. Then the piece de resistance, the Monet haystacks. As the auctioneer, a nervous man with a pince-nez, began his spiel, a brilliant plan began to form in James's mind. He leaned over to Pamela, who was standing in the back of the room. "Ready for the finale?" he whispered. "This is insane," she breathed, but her eyes were dancing. "Just follow my lead." James used his cane to walk to the front of the room, clearing his throat. "One moment," he announced, his voice resonating with authority. "Before you continue, I believe there's a matter of provenance that needs to be addressed." Amelia's smile froze. "Father, you're unwell. The auction is in progress." "Nonsense," James declared. "This painting, it's a fake." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer looked like he was about to faint. Charles stepped forward. "Father, please, you're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" James asked, a sly smile playing on his lips. He then looked at the painting and, in a moment of theatrical genius, announced, "The real one is here." He slowly, deliberately, pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket. A high-definition image of the real Monet, which he'd had Gaspard take for comparison. See the brushwork? The subtle difference in the shadows? The copy is magnificent, but it is a copy. Pamela had prepped for this. Before the auction began, she had, under the guise of a final check, placed a small, easily removed speck of dust on a strategically irrelevant but highly visible part of the frame. Now, in the chaos, she moved forward. "He's right," she said, her voice clear and calm. "The signature is on a slightly different axis, and there's a microscopic flaw in the varnish here." She used a magnifying glass she had in her pocket, pointing to the area where the fake's crackle pattern didn't quite match the photograph. "This is a very good forgery." The room erupted. Accusations flew. Amelia and Charles were pale, stammering. They could only sputter about their father's madness. But the damage was done. In the high-stakes world of art auctions, any taint of forgery is a death knell. The bidding halted, the buyers recoiled, and the illusion of the Croft fortune shattered. Amelia and Charles were led away, facing a storm of lawsuits and public humiliation. Their plan had backfired spectacularly. The priceless collection was worthless. Their reputation was in tatters. As the chaos settled, James turned to Pamela. He offered her his arm. "Well, my dear," he said, his voice full of a youthful energy he hadn't felt in years. "Now the real work begins." With the fortune he'd preserved, secretly selling the real masterpieces to a consortium of private European collectors and museums he trusted, he bought a beautiful, cavernous space in a burgeoning part of London. It had been an old textile warehouse, full of light and potential. They stood in the empty space together, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. "Well, what shall we call it?" James asked. Pamela, still stunned by the past week, just shook her head, a smile breaking across her face. "I don't know. The Croft and Vance Gallery has a ring to it." James chuckled. "It sounds like a law firm." They named it simply The Second Act. It was more than just a gallery. It was a testament to their heist, their partnership, and their improbable love. They weren't just co-owners. They were a team, curating shows that challenged the establishment, championing lost artists, and giving the art world a much-needed jolt of genuine passion. He was no longer the retired, forgotten dealer in the beige room. He was James Croft, the impresario, the master of the comeback. And she was his partner, his equal, and the brilliant, fierce woman who had shown him that the greatest masterpiece isn't a painting at all. It's the art of living a second life, side by side with the person who sees you for who you truly are. The morning after the auction, James Croft woke up in a bed that wasn't his. Not the narrow, lumpy mattress of Fairview Pines, nor the grand four-poster of his ancestral estate. This was a hotel suite at the Ritz, and the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows was the most beautiful thing he'd seen in months. He sat up slowly, his joints protesting, and surveyed the room. His clothes from the previous night were draped over a chair, the suit he'd worn to his own children's downfall. He smiled at the memory, the look on Amelia's face when the auctioneer declared the Monet a forgery. Charles's desperate, flailing attempts to regain control of the room. The whispered accusations, the shouted denials, the slow, horrible realization that their entire scheme had collapsed. And Pamela, standing beside him in the chaos, her hand steady on his arm, her voice calm and clear as she delivered the final blow. She had been magnificent. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. He rose, wrapped himself in a hotel robe, and opened it to find Pamela standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing a grin that could light up the London skyline. "Good morning, partner," she said, handing him a cup. "You look like a man who just destroyed his children's lives and slept like a baby." "I did destroy their lives," James replied, taking a sip. "And I slept like a baby for the first time in 3 months. How did you sleep?" "Like the dead," she admitted, stepping past him into the room. "I don't think I've ever been so exhausted and so exhilarated at the same time. Did you see Charles's face? I thought he was going to have a stroke right there on the auction floor." "Pity he didn't," James muttered. Would have saved us the legal fees. Pamela laughed. A warm, genuine sound that made James feel 20 years younger. She settled into an armchair and pulled out a tablet. I've been doing some research. The news is everywhere. Croft heirs accused of auction fraud. Estranged father exposes multi-million-dollar hoax. The tabloids are having a field day. James waved a dismissive hand. Let them feast. The more attention they draw, the more people will want to know the real story. And the real story, he said, his eyes glinting, is that the art is safe. He moved to the small desk in the corner of the suite and pulled out a leather-bound ledger, the same one he'd been keeping since his first day at Fairview Pines. Every painting, every brushstroke, every secret detail of his collection was recorded there in his own meticulous handwriting. Now, he said, flipping it open, the real work begins. In Pamela's studio day. Pamela's studio was a converted warehouse in Shoreditch. All exposed brick and north-facing windows. It smelled of turpentine and ambition. James stood in the center of the space, surrounded by canvases in various states of restoration, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. This is where we'll start, Pamela said, gesturing to a large table covered in photographs, documents, and shipping manifests. I've already contacted 3 museums and 4 private collectors who expressed interest in acquiring some of the pieces. Discreetly, of course. Discreetly is the only way, James agreed. We can't flood the market. The value depends on scarcity, on the story we tell. Each piece needs to find the right home. Somewhere it will be appreciated, not just owned. He picked up a photograph of the Courbet, the one he'd always regretted selling. Pamela had tracked it down through a network of art historians and provenance experts. It was currently in the hands of a reclusive Swiss billionaire who had no idea it was part of a larger collection. I want this one back, James said softly. It was my mother's favorite. She used to say it reminded her of the coast where she grew up. Pamela moved to stand beside him. I'll make some calls. The owner owes a favor to a colleague of mine. We might be able to negotiate a trade. James looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. You're remarkable, Pamela. Do you know that? She flushed slightly and looked away. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Croft. James, he corrected. After everything we've been through, I think we're past formalities. She met his eyes again, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond they'd forged in the crucible of the past few weeks. All right, James, but don't expect me to start calling you boss. Wouldn't dream of it. In the second act, construction site, 3 months later. The old textile warehouse was a shell of its former self. Dust hung in the air like a curtain, and the sound of hammers echoed off the bare walls. But even in its unfinished state, it was beautiful. James stood in the center of the main gallery space, his cane tapping against the concrete floor as he walked. His back ached, his knees protested, but he'd never felt more alive. Here, Pamela said, pointing to a wall that had been partially demolished. This is where we'll put the exposed brick, and the lighting will be track-mounted, adjustable for each piece. I've already spoken to an electrician who specializes in gallery installations. James nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. And the office? I need a space with good natural light. Not for me, for the artists we'll be featuring. I want them to feel welcome here, not intimidated. Pamela smiled. I've already planned for that. There's a mezzanine level at the back that we can convert into a residency space. 6 artists at a time, rotating every 3 months. Workshops, lectures, open studios. It's going to be a hub, James. Not just a gallery, a community. He felt a lump form in his throat. For years, he'd built his career on exclusivity, on the thrill of the chase, on acquiring and selling masterpieces to the wealthiest collectors in the world. But this was something different. This was about giving back. You know, he said quietly, When I was young, I dreamed of opening a space like this, a place where art could be seen by anyone, not just the elite. I got lost along the way. I let the money, the prestige, the game, I let it consume me. Pamela placed a hand on his arm. You found your way back. That's what matters. He covered her hand with his own. I had help. In the second act, opening night, 6 months later, the gallery was packed. Art critics, collectors, journalists, and curious locals mingled among the polished concrete floors and the warm glow of the track lighting. The walls were covered in works by emerging artists, bold, challenging, alive. James stood near the entrance, resplendent in a tailored navy suit, greeting each guest with the charm that had made him a legend in the art world. His children were notably absent. He didn't mind. He'd made peace with their absence long ago. Pamela was across the room, surrounded by a group of young artists who were hanging on her every word. She was radiant in a simple black dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Every few minutes, she'd glance his way, and they'd exchange a smile that said everything. A young woman approached James, her eyes wide with admiration. Mr. Croft, I can't believe you're actually here. I grew up reading about your acquisitions. You were my hero. James chuckled. I was a lot of people's hero, until I wasn't. I don't believe that, the young woman insisted. What you've done here, giving these artists a platform, a chance, it's incredible. It's what the art world needs. He was about to respond when Pamela appeared at his side, her arm slipping through his. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice warm, but we have a problem. The caterers seem to have misplaced the champagne. James laughed. Then I suppose we'll have to make do with wine. The horror. Pamela rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. The young woman looked between them, a knowing expression on her face. You two make a good team, she said. We do, James agreed. The best. In the second act, private office, later. The crowd had thinned. The last guests were drifting out, their voices fading into the London night. James and Pamela stood in the small office at the back of the gallery, surrounded by the chaos of a successful opening. Empty glasses, discarded programs, the faint scent of perfume and success. James lowered himself into a chair with a sigh. I'm too old for this, he muttered. My feet are killing me. Pamela laughed. You loved every minute of it. Don't pretend otherwise. He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the weight of everything they'd been through. The fear, the danger, the triumph. And now this quiet moment, just the two of them, surrounded by the art they'd saved together. Pamela, he said, his voice rough, I don't know how to say this. I'm not good at feelings. I spent my life dealing in objects, in things I could hold and appraise. People were always harder. She moved closer, her eyes searching his face. James, what are you trying to say? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Don't worry, he said quickly. It's not a ring. Not yet. He opened the box to reveal a pair of delicate pearl earrings. Antique, clearly old and valuable. These were my mother's. She wore them on her wedding day. I've been saving them for someone who deserved them. For someone who, against all odds, saw through the old man in the beige room and saw a partner. A friend. He couldn't finish the sentence. But he didn't need to. Pamela took the box from his trembling hands and looked at the earrings. Then she looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. James, Take them, he urged. They're yours. You saved my art, Pamela. But more than that, you saved me. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to hope, a reason to believe that the best part of my life wasn't behind me. It was ahead of me. She closed the box and pressed it to her chest. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, he whispered. Say you'll keep being my partner. In the gallery. In everything. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and sure. I'm not going anywhere, James. I haven't been anywhere since the moment I walked into Fairview Pines and saw you sitting there, pretending to be a helpless old man." He laughed, a genuine, full laugh that echoed through the empty gallery. "I was never helpless, my dear. I was waiting, and you were worth the wait." She leaned in and kissed his cheek, a gesture so gentle and unexpected that it stole his breath. "You're remarkable, James Croft. Don't ever forget that." "I won't," he promised. "Not as long as you're here to remind me." XT. London Street. Night. The city sparkled around them as they stepped out of the gallery, arm in arm. The air was crisp, the sky clear, the stars just beginning to emerge. James breathed deeply, tasting freedom and possibility. "Where to now?" Pamela asked. He smiled, a wicked glint in his eye. "I was thinking we could pay a visit to Gaspard. He's been working on a very special commission for us. A small, exquisite Vermeer that I've been wanting to add to the collection." Pamela raised an eyebrow. "A Vermeer? The real thing?" "Better," James said, his voice full of mischief. "A real one that no one knows exists. Gaspard found it in a private collection in Vienna. The owner has no idea what he has. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." Pamela shook her head, laughing. "You're incorrigible. You know that? That's why you love me," James said. She squeezed his arm. "I suppose it is." They walked into the night, two partners in crime, two lovers of art, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The second act was just beginning, and it was going to be magnificent. The gallery was thriving. The walls were covered with works by artists who had become household names, thanks to the platform James and Pamela had created. The residency program was fully operational, the workshops were packed, and the weekly lectures were standing room only. In the corner of the main gallery, two people stood admiring a painting, a small, haunting Courbet that had once belonged to James's mother. "It looks happy here," Pamela said, gesturing to the painting. "Like it's finally home." James nodded, his eyes soft. "It is home. We all are." Pamela slipped her hand into his. "You know what I love most about this place? It's not the art. It's the people. The artists, the visitors, the community. You built something real here, James. Something that matters." "We built it," he corrected. "Together." She smiled up at him. "Together. I like the sound of that." He squeezed her hand. "So do I. So do I." The gallery buzzed with life around them. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses, the rustle of programs. It was everything James had ever wanted, and everything he'd thought he'd lost forever. But he hadn't lost it. He'd found it in the most unexpected way, in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. Pamela Vance, the brilliant, fierce, paint-stained woman who had seen through his facade and into his soul. The gallery wasn't just a business. It was a testament to their partnership, their love, their second chance. And as James looked around the room, at the art and the people and the life he'd built, he knew one thing for certain. The best art wasn't hanging on the walls. It was standing right beside him. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you found this story interesting, please consider giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you want to hear plenty more stories just like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more to unpack in future videos. See you soon.